I think I would kind of go back to what we were talking about earlier with like sweeping things under the rug. That's the first thing that came to my mind.
Okay.
And I will say that it's something, again, just I'm trying to unlearn a lot of stuff.
I would submit back to you, I would challenge that idea and say the illusion of keeping people happy.
You're right.
Because not addressing it doesn't actually make you happy.
Yeah.
It just maintains the peace somewhat because you're not actually dealing with it. Do you think, not just from what you physically experienced, but was there any aspect of that was maybe from a cultural lens, that from your family, just you can keep it just specific to your family if you want, that was maybe more acceptable from a cultural standpoint, and even though you disagree with it maybe now or agree, it helped shape the way that you see yourself or you see relationships with others?
Okay, give me 1 second, I'm trying to think.
Sure.
So something that I observed or learned that I'm still like acceptable of. That's what you're saying?
Well, it could be you're accepting or not accepting of.
Not
So for
accepting.
example, let me give an example just to drive this idea home, because we're talking about from a cultural lens. So we talked earlier about how I said culturally, in my experience, most black families, it's very common to utilize corporal punishment for discipline, right? It's a very commonly acceptable experience. Does that mean that we agree with it all? No, but culturally, it is a very common accepted experience. Do you think, however you identify, however your family may identify, are there things that you recognize from a cultural lens that you may align yourself with, or things that there are expectations of you, but you don't align yourself with?
I think I would kind of go back to what we were talking about earlier with like sweeping things under the rug. That's the first thing that came to my mind.
Okay.
And I will say that it's something, again, just I'm trying to unlearn a lot of stuff, but that is something that I, even to this day, there have been situations that have happened recently that I've just, just let it go. I didn't necessarily feel as though it's something that needed to be addressed, but it's also like, it wouldn't have hurt to address the situation. And I think that that's something, like I said, like with, arguments with like family and things like that, that is, rarely have, we ever, like, we'd have discussions about it, but I feel as though it, would happen maybe like days or weeks after, when we've, we forget about stuff, or, I guess maybe we're just not as mad or whatever.
Sure.
But that is something that I'm trying to unlearn, and something that I definitely do not agree with. But I will wholeheartedly say, I feel like this is something that across the board, a lot of, Black family, honestly, minority families in general have adopted and have done, as far as just not really addressing it and not wanting to have uncomfortable conversations, just for the sake of, keeping everybody happy or keeping everybody comfortable. So,
which I would submit back to you, I would challenge that idea and say the illusion of keeping people happy.
You're right.
Because not addressing it doesn't actually make you happy.
Yeah.
It just maintains the peace somewhat because you're not actually dealing with it.
Yeah, that is,
right.
You're right.
But it's still going to be sitting there underneath the surface. We know that from a clinical perspective. It's absolutely going to impact you in the way that you deal with that person or people, even as time progresses. But I do think, to your point, so you're kind of describing a family systems culture, right? That dynamic that existed inside of your household, which is still a form of culture. And essentially a lot of what you're trying to take away from and trying to move away from, because you recognize that a lot of it maybe wasn't the healthiest way to engage with other people.
Yeah.
Is that
okay
to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Most definitely.
I think, again, that those things are important just because it helps us understand what are the expectations that are impressed upon us when we're younger. What are the things that you are expected to do, even if you truly don't agree with them, even if you didn't like them, even if you'd like to change them. because there's sort of this internal conflict that happens when expectations are put upon you, right? Especially cultural ones. It's, you're supposed to do things like this. You're supposed to behave like this. You carry yourself like this. But what happens if those don't gel with you? How do you learn how to navigate that in a healthy way? Do you just run away from it and you try to like avoid that and maybe other issues because you don't want to confront stuff? Do you learn how to deal with them head on, but maybe you do it in an overly aggressive and hostile way because nobody teaches you how to use your words in an effective way? These are all the nuanced ways that we end up learning or inadvertently learning how to try to deal with things.
Yeah.
Right? But that matters. It really, really matters because it sets the tone. It sets like a precedent. If it happened once, it's likely going to happen again. And then we sort of grow accustomed to it even when we don't like it. That's like a form of culture.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good.
So I like to mention that point because sometimes like we don't deconstruct these things very well, you know, or we kind of stick to the surface level. Like, no, you got to go deep, man. You got to get to the root of stuff if you really want to address things, if you want it to be better.
Yeah.
You know. So, and speaking of that, you obviously kind of answered this question already, but if you wanted to elaborate a little further about seeking out mental health services. So we've obviously touched on how for so many of us, there's a lot of things that are beneath the surface that we probably should be talking about and should be working through, but we don't for, you know, maybe a variety of reasons. But you clearly have. Do you remember the first reason why you initially decided to seek out therapy?
I want to say it was probably because of the romantic relationship I was in. Yeah, back then, because I first saw a therapist, I want to say that was 2017, and I was just I was going through a lot, and so I just needed somebody to talk to that wasn't necessarily like familiar with my situation. Like, my friends were great, they're supportive, but it's very, very helpful to have someone who doesn't know, you know, I don't know, it felt comforting having someone that you didn't necessarily like know you and only knew like the specific like facts and stuff of the situation. And so that's why I sought out help. And then also just because of like how bad my relationship had been with my dad during that time, just because of like the fallout of, you know, the divorce and the way things had happened. So yeah, I want to say that was the reason why. So I went and I got connected with a therapist at the University Counseling Center.
Okay. So this is happening right when you were in undergrad?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you feel like for the issues that you went there for, do you feel like you got any type of productive feedback, anything you could actually try to like work off of?
I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't really think so. The only thing that I remember that stuck with me was I forgot what had happened at that point. This was all the way into the new year. So this was in 2018, one of my last sessions with her, because she had to move. So yeah. But the one thing that I remember was I was going through it with the same dude. And the one thing that I remember was like her saying like, okay, well, look back at what you have been dealing with for like these last couple of years and things like that. Is that something that you want to bring into your new year? And so like, just
Good
like,
question.
is that literally something that you want to continue to repeat?
Yes.
And that's something that I listen to, you know, for the most part now. I didn't listen to it back then, but because, you know, there, you know, a couple years went by, but that is something that stuck with me. But I will say, and I wonder where she is now, but I will say, it took a while. My therapist right now, she's the one that I really feel as though like I'm actually doing some sort of like work in trying to like correct my outlook on things and correcting my behavior. But I mean, although it didn't necessarily work out with the first therapist that I had, she definitely didn't she didn't leave like a sour taste in my mouth or anything about therapy. I mean, obviously I'm trying to be a therapist now, so.
No, that's good. And I mean, and I appreciate you making that point. I am in general a fan of like counseling centers on campus, but I also completely understand that they're very limited in scope of what they can do.
Yes.
Especially depending on the type of institution you're at. For example, I went to UCF, and so second largest institution in the country. So that means the student population is massive.
Yeah.
So there's only so much, access you can have in terms of, crisis intervention, is usually pretty standard. But if I want to have like a long-term relationship with my therapist, it's probably going to be limited to a semester, maybe two. Which doesn't mean you can't get anything done, but it may mean, you might need some additional work that you got to do outside of the school environment.
Yeah.
So I think it could be a good like on-ramp for a lot of folks that maybe have never had it. And so I think it is important for us to just, number one, to get started if you know that you're having issues that you have kind of largely swept under the rug or just not dealt with. They can kind of be that initial, let me get a sense of what this looks like, how this could feel, and trying to get some level of production out of it.
Yeah.
But know that there's still going to be more that I'm probably going to have to get done on my own. I think that that's important. But the starting point also is really important. So the relationship is what drove you to it. And the relationship also was connected to the relationship with your dad. So relationship with X at that time was the initial reason why you started. But then as you're maybe working through it, and I'm trying to clarify, I'm not speaking like I know. And then as you're speaking with them and you're working through the process, you recognize that the relationship with dad is a reflection of why maybe you're dealing with the person that you're dealing with, or some of the issues that you allowed to happen.
I think it was more so, I wish I could like actually remember so I can give you like a actual
That's okay. I mean, the
like,
best
yes
that you can,
no.
obviously, it's okay.
I want to say, I think it was more so a situation where like well, actually no, because I remember she asked me like what I wanted to work on, and I know that was the guy was like the main thing that I wanted to discuss, but I also knew that I wanted to try to like work through and process the stuff with my dad. So I think like he probably was the catalyst for it, but there was also stuff that I had going on in the back of my mind that I still wanted to address in relation to my dad. Okay.
So maybe dad in and of it, the situations that you had with him at that time in and of themselves were not enough to get you in the door.
Yeah.
The boyfriend was.
Yeah.
But once you got there, you're like, okay, I know I also need to deal with these things too. Okay. And listen, and I only ask, and I appreciate you sharing that, because we all have different ways and how we may start that journey, right? I don't think there's like one right or wrong way to do it. It's just more important that you start.
Yeah.
Right. I only ask because I'm curious, because to me, again, a lot of the things that we deal with later on in life are simply a reflection of what we experienced early on in life. So to me, what you said is a perfect, like almost textbook definition of that. The things I'm dealing with this guy make me reflect back on what happened with my father, the first man that typically a young lady is going to fall in love with and have a healthy relationship, we would hope. So if that one didn't go as expected, naturally the ones with other men probably not going to, especially if it's like early on in your life, those are probably not going to go as expected. So understanding the relationship that those two have on each other is, I think, important. That's an important takeaway if you decide to engage in therapy.